So university publishing houses, all publishing right now, but especially university publishers are really financially in trouble, and increasingly they are looking for books that are going to appeal more broadly than to a small academic audience. And so one of the things that necessarily that's going to affect is tenure decisions. There's a lot of universities are really rethinking the first book for tenure, just because an excellent piece of scholarship may or may not get published. So that's one problem. That's the bad news.
A little bit more bad news, but mixed with a hopeful undercurrent. So one of the things that I've seen happening is it's becoming increasingly difficult to find readers for certain projects, because everybody is spread a little bit more thin. Yeah, so people are tapped out. And there are just fewer scholars in the field. Yeah. So it can sometimes take longer to get manuscripts reviewed. So I was editing a journal for about 7 years, and one of the things that we saw happening was that we were getting fewer and fewer submissions. Mm-hmm. So there's a silver lining to that, which is that I think it can be a little bit easier to get your work read at certain publications, but again, it may take a little bit longer for it to be reviewed, and I'm also waiting for the next shoe to drop, which is for journals to start folding. Mm-hmm. Online publication means that it isn't as expensive to publish certain kinds of journals, but still it's not free, and these are all seem like disposable expenditures for some institutions. In terms of service to the field, it's one of the most gratifying because you can actually make an impact. Reader reports are great, but you're seeing such a small piece of the project, and it's such a delimited thing you're being asked. But the manuscript review is you're taking on the whole project, and you really have the chance to help a younger scholar shape it in the way that most thoroughly aligns with their vision. I think that's the trick, as we were discussing, is making sure that it aligns with their vision rather than your vision. But I find that work incredibly gratifying.
I agree with all that, and I would add that, and I'm going to be utopian on this one, I think what we do is incredibly important. What we do as humanities scholars and literary critics in particular, I think it is so important for so many reasons. And I don't think that in the end, in the long haul, that's going to be something that goes away. I think it's just too important, and I really believe people are going to see that. As there's less of it, they're going to see what's missing. And the joy of talking ideas and of sitting down with a smart work that somebody is doing that has so much going for it, helping the person realize the full potential of the work is such an exciting process, in the same way that teaching is so exciting. And this is, at a much higher level, obviously, but it's still about taking ideas and insights and deep thinking and bringing a project that is going to teach the world something new to life. So I love doing this.
I mean, I think I was feeling kind of stuck with this manuscript where I wasn't sure. I needed that kind of external perspective from readers to kind of help me understand, like, what can this be, kind of, right? Like, I think I know what I want it to be, but I'm not sure I know what I want it to be. And I think, like, the kinds of questions that we were talking about and the kinds of trajectories are not things that I could come up with kind of sitting in isolation with the project any longer on my own, right? So that kind of external perspective, I think, is invaluable to any writing project, right? Mm-hmm. You need that kind of external feedback and readership to kind of move it forward.
I wish I had known how long the review process would take. For my first book, it took over a year to get reader reports.
Oof.
Yes, which is especially brutal when you're in the tenure track. I also could have used some real coaching on how to think about my audience. I had to sort of figure that out on my own. Writing the dissertation is a very different kind of project than writing the book, and I'm not sure that I got as much advice about the difference between those two projects as I could have used. There are sort of things about the dissertation that are really about sort of showing your work and making sure that you've checked all the boxes that really need to go away when you're writing it as a book for a different kind of audience. So I think that would have been helpful. I think first books are really hard in part because they so often are originating in a dissertation. Mm-hmm. And a dissertation is a learning process, right? And so then to take a learning process and translate it into something that's a finished product and is like a grown-up project, that's hard. And this is another reason to do these kinds of manuscript workshops, is to help people sort of over that hump.
Yeah.
Turning the one thing into a very different kind of thing.
So my process was a little different because I did not turn my dissertation into a book. I was done with it. It was in my way. My dissertation was on a topic that I thought was holding the book together, and in fact it was holding me back from my questions. So a couple of things I wish I had known. First and foremost, again, something we talked about, I wish I had known that the despair that it wasn't a book that I felt on a regular basis is normal in the writing process. One of the best things about writing my second book was knowing that despair preceded a deeper insight, and it was a good sign, not a bad one. But it really scared me. And again, because so much depends on it for tenure in my case. Well, actually, my very top tip is that thing I said I wish I had known, which is that the despair is normal, and the feeling that it's not a book, or I'm never going to get there, whatever. Those are very, very normal writing feelings about writing. So that's my number one. My number two, and this is actually something this is my third thing actually that I also wish I had known. I wish I had known to step back and ask myself, what is the deep question, not even about academia, but in my life? What is the deep thing that I really want to understand about the world, and why? And that question actually, one question or a question or whatever, a question like that informs every writing project. And the more people understand that, the more control they have over what they're writing. That you can always go back and say, wait, why am I writing this again? What am I trying to get at again? I wish someone had asked me that question. And it took to my second book for me to realize what my first book had been motivated by and to figure out the second book. And it made the writing easier, more rewarding, richer in every way. You can't write in utter isolation. You need to be in conversation with people. A manuscript workshop is great, a writing group is great. At the same time, you've got to trust your gut. So we, for instance, can come in and tell you what isn't working, but we can't tell you, and we can give you ideas for how to think about it, but what we can't and shouldn't tell you is exactly what you should be doing in the book. You have to trust that if you have a gut feeling that something belongs in that book, a particular chapter, or, as we talked about, one of the novels, allowing yourself to think about the possibility of not including it and to imagine that possibility. If you still come back and say, no, this belongs there, take the time to figure out why and trust that feeling. Giving yourself the possibility that everything you're doing is potentially removable, but then trusting your gut about what really isn't.
Well, in terms of what I tell my students, I tell them to be gentle with themselves because writing can be very hard. And I feel like there's a lot of guilt and anxiety that comes along with the writing process. And I feel like I see my former graduate students, my current and former graduate students, being unrealistic about their expectations, and so getting themselves sort of deeper into anxiety and guilt. And I think, once there's a greater emphasis on taking care of yourself and thinking about this as part of your life, some of that can decrease. I completely agree that what we do is very important. At the same time, we're not saving lives that are at stake in getting it done next week, right? Nothing rests on that. And so that's something I really try to enforce with my students.
We are saving lives, but it's long term.
It's very long term, right? It's very long term, and and the students, like, they need to take care of themselves first.
Absolutely,
right?
Yes.
The second tip is that you're telling a story, right? And the more important it is to you, the more interesting and compelling a story it will be for other people. I actually think we are storytellers, and the work that I've enjoyed doing most has been the work that has connected with my own experience the most closely, and that of the people I'm telling the story to. There needs to be joy.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
yes,
there needs to be
passion
joy,
and
there needs to be pleasure. Not everything about writing is pleasurable, much about writing is not pleasurable, but there is, if you're not looking forward to it at least some of the time, that might be telling you something.
Yes. Yep.
Again, without in any way diminishing the fact that it is important work, there's lots of important work out there to be done.
Absolutely, of course.
And if there's not something joyful about it, maybe there's other work that could be joyful and also impactful and important.
Totally. And I would add, just amplify that it has to come from passion.
Yeah.
You have to feel passionate and invested. And one other thing I would add that I think comes from that to some extent, people tell you, think about your audience, what's your audience, know your audience. I actually tell people, don't think about your audience. And I'll tell you why. None of us is 100% original. If I have a question that I'm asking or something that I feel very passionate about, there's tons of people out there who also do. Have faith that you are not the only person interested in these questions, but you don't know who is, and they certainly aren't definable by a particular field. Trust that there are readers out there who will find it if you're writing from your passion and you're writing from your conviction and you're writing about something you really care about. It will find its readers. Too many people wait to see what the response is and think that they can gauge. I have friends like that, think that they can gauge who's reading it and who isn't. And they're like, nobody's reading my book. No, you don't know who's reading your book. And that's not the point anyway. The point is you are invested in figuring something out, and that's what the writing process is about. And then it is, to me, an act of generosity to send it into the world where it will enter conversations that you don't even know exist and do work for other people. It's a form of teaching. Writing is a form of teaching. The work we do is important.
Work is important, and thank you so much for the work you did.
Oh, it was really a pleasure.